Walk on water. So good. Well, we just want to welcome everyone online who are in their homes. And it's really fun to think you're out there. I just wish I could see everybody. But this is the Medina's house, Annabelle and Ellie Medina. And how long have you guys been meeting here as a home group?
Oh, I lost count, but about 15 years now.
15, 16 years.
Yeah. Started with Dice Up and, and us and Myra, and it's grown since then.
Wow. So that's why we started here, because this is the longest standing life group that we have. And I just feel like God is so proud of your faithfulness over the years. Not just to have home group, but what I was sensing was that you've been faithful with hearts. You've been faithful with hearts. And God is so proud. Ellie and Annabelle have been some of the biggest encouragers for me over the years, you know. And I really get pumped up when you guys encourage me. So it's like another mama and papa that I have. Yeah. And I'm really full because we had a bunch of empanadas and potato things from where is it? Porto's.
Yes.
Porto's.
Brought to you by Porto's.
Yeah.
Get those from my sister.
Yes, from roaster.
Yeah. So why are we doing home groups? Wow, well, at first I was not quite sure. I still don't have all the details of why God wanted to do home groups as opposed to at church, meeting in the sanctuary. I'm sure we'll get back to church. There's something special about church that we have, that when we all get together and we can have extended times of worship. I know it's a little bit more difficult to worship when you're watching a TV screen, but there's something special about all getting together and celebrating. But I feel like during this season, God wants to emphasize small groups for a bunch of different reasons. One is that he's redefining what church means. And church really, Christianity really have to be, the process has to be developed in interaction with people. Christianity doesn't really happen in isolation. You know, when Jesus said, this is my new covenant, my new command to love one another, it's easy to say, my heart's pure, my heart's clean when you're living on an island, right? But when you have to interact, then you're realizing, oh, I got some work to do. But also there's such a blessing in fellowship because each person has Christ in you, right? It says in Colossians. And so when we get to interact, we get to know and experience God in a new way when everyone shares. And when everyone shares, they get to express themselves. God gets to hear them, and we get to all grow in our giftings. And there's just so many good things about it that I believe, and I've believed this for a long time, that it should be really the emphasis or the priority of our church and the church is small groups. And then Sundays are just the cherry on top, fun when we get to come and celebrate together, So that's part of the things I'm always asking God why, this is kind of a big move to go in this direction on a Sunday morning. And so I felt like it was the word of the Lord, and that's good enough for me, but I'm very curious as to why. I want to know why. Why, Lord? Why are you emphasizing this in this season? So there's just a couple points. But I wanted to get into a message that has been kind of, burning on my heart the last few weeks. And, we've been going through Exodus, and there's so many ties from Exodus into now what God is doing. And it's interesting that we think, the government's rising up, taking away our liberties. And I have a feeling that we are already enslaved, but these things that are happening are actually causing us to wake up more than anything, you know, causing us to examine and think more deeply about what is the church, what is my purpose, what is the nature of the church's calling, you know. Also, I've been thinking lately about what is the destiny of our nation. You know, we were started as pioneers. We started, and one of the biggest strengths of our nation is that we create. We create things. I'm talking inventions, ways of living, just pioneers in creating new ways. And I feel like when we stop doing that, you know, is when we are not living out our destiny. We need to continue to create. But Exodus is obviously a time where God rescued his people. And in Hebrews 11:13 through 16, there's 11 is all the heroes of the faith. Well, this sums up kind of what they were after. There's a common theme in all of the heroes of the faith, you know. And this says, these heroes all died still clinging to their faith, not even receiving all that had been promised to them, but they saw beyond the horizon the fulfillment of their promises and gladly embraced them from afar. They all lived their lives on earth as those who belonged to another realm. They lived their lives as those who belong to another realm. That is key for us, I believe. Verse 14, for clearly those who live this way are longing for the appearing of a heavenly city. And if their hearts were still remembering what they had left behind, kind of like Lot's wife, you know, if their hearts were still remembering what they had left behind, they would have found an opportunity to go back. But they couldn't turn back, for their hearts were fixed on what was far greater, that is, a heavenly realm. So because of this, because their hearts were fixed, get this is so good, God is not ashamed in any way to be called their God. Wow. For he has prepared a heavenly city for them. And you think about these people, like it started with Abraham, right? God spoke to Abraham, and Abraham got a promise. And it wasn't just the promise of a son, but it was a promise of a multitude, a legacy, that he would bless all the other nations. That was a huge promise when you don't even have an heir. And so the son was just the means, but the promise was the multitude, that he would be a father of many nations. It says in Genesis 12, 1 through 3, it says, now the Lord said to Abraham, go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house. He's calling him out from comfort. He's calling him out from what he's known all his life. He says, to the land which I will show you. Moses didn't even see it yet. Imagine going and saying, God says, I have a house for you. I want you to give up everything. And you're like, well, where is it? What does it look like? You know, but he didn't even see it. God said, I will show you what this land looks like. That's a lot of faith. He says, I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great. And so you shall be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And this is where we get the whole idea of blessing the nation of Israel, right? And in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. That's a huge promise to Abraham, right? Romans 4:13 says, for the promise to Abraham or to his descendants that he would be heir of the world was not through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. Romans 4:16, for this reason it is by faith, in order that it may be in accordance with grace, so that the promise will be guaranteed to all the descendants. So this is talking about Abraham's promise. It would bless all the descendants, all his descendants. But get this, not only to those who are of the law, but also to those who are of the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. And so we get to be grafted into this by faith. It's not just his bloodline, but now his descendants are descendants of faith. He is our father in the faith. Isn't that amazing? So we get to go right into this promise of Abraham. And Abraham, he had this promise, and this promise became a passion. It wasn't just a thing on the side. It became a passion for him. He never abandoned this promise of possessing that land. And in Genesis 24, when he sent out his servant to go find a wife for his son, the servant asked a question, what if she won't come back? What should I do? Should I bring Isaac there? And he said, do not do that. Never bring Isaac there. This is the land that God promised to us. He kept his eyes locked on this promise that God had for him, right? And he made him swear that he would not take his son there. Even Joseph, after all those years, Joseph being a descendant of Abraham, they were living in the promised land. And through all those circumstances, I even believe that this is not necessarily biblical, but I even believe that God had a better way. Imagine Joseph with his dreams and all that. If he would have had a little bit more wisdom and caution, he could have stayed there in the promised land, had those dreams, and maybe God would have had him store up food there during the famine, and all the nations would have come there instead of Egypt. Imagine that. Because I don't believe that God caused his brothers to sin, right? But obviously God works everything out for good. And so he ends up being in Egypt. He interprets Pharaoh's dream. They end up saving all the grain for those plentiful years. And then when the famine came, they had enough. They even had enough for other nations, right? And so here's Joseph in the land of Egypt, and Pharaoh has favor on him. He brings his whole family. They give him the best land in Goshen. And so when Joseph's about to die, all these years he's been there, he lived 120 years. Joseph's about to die, and he says in Genesis 50, 24 and 25, Joseph says, I am about to die, but God will surely take care of you and bring you up from this land. He still had the promise in his heart. He always knew that Egypt was not a permanent place. He said, when God will surely take care of you, bring you up from this land to the land which he'd promised on oath to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely take care of you, and you shall carry my bones up from here. Even though he was dead, his heart was still burning for the promised land. And so he wanted his bones in that promised land. He's like, I'm going to get there somehow. My bones are going to end up there in the promised land. That's how much of a passion this was starting from Abraham. But something happened during these years. Joseph dies. They live in Goshen. They have the best land of Egypt, it says, and they forget about the promised land. They forget about the promise. At some point, they decide this is home. And end up being there for 400 years. And I believe that, even though we think when the taskmaster started beating them, when Pharaoh began to get fearful of them becoming too large, we think, oh, that's the day that they were enslaved. But I believe that the day they called Israel home was the day they got enslaved. They got enslaved to comfort, luxury, and complacency. They forgot the vision and the promise that God had given them. And so when the taskmasters began to beat them, abuse them, enslave them physically, I believe it actually woke them up from their sleep. And that's when they started crying out to God. God in us is our destination. Us in Him, and He in us. That is the promised land for us. Whatever we do here on earth, there is more. There's way more than this earth. This is almost like Egypt, you know. I mean, God blesses us for sure. We're blessed. But the moment we call this place our permanent home is the moment that we get enslaved. And I believe what's going on the earth right now is just waking us up from our sleep. When Israel got comfortable, that's when they entered into bondage. They'd forgotten the vision of their people, the promise that God had given them, right? So when the enemy switched tactics, they didn't even bother to say, should we stay here? Should we fight against this? Since they were already had the mentality, they were already enslaved. When you're enslaved to comfort and complacency, and you have that, no matter what's coming against you, you want to just try to keep that comfort as long as you possibly can. And so it was worth it to them to be beaten and enslaved than to give up the land that they were living in. That's how bad it was. That's how deceitful that the enemy is with this whole thing of comfort and complacency. It's actually a very, very dangerous thing. So the Israelites did not even know that they were in bondage. They were lulled to sleep. Abraham held on to the promise. Joseph held on to this promise. And the promise does not become a passion again until Caleb and Joshua. That promise starts becoming a passion again. But God is calling us back to the purpose that we were purchased for. He's calling us back to say, this is not your permanent home. No matter how nice your home is, no matter how nice the weather is in Los Angeles, this is not your permanent home. You actually have a destiny. And that's why God said, I'm not ashamed to be called their God. It's because they had their eyes fixed on another realm, another home. That's why it's harder to get Egypt out of the people than to get the people out of Egypt. The promised land is Zion. The Bible talks about Zion all over the place. And Zion was known to be a place, it's like heaven on earth. It's like city on a hill. You know, this place that was of another realm. The mountain of God, right? So the pursuit that we're going for is really to detach, get the world system out of our veins, right? Out of our thinking. We have to renew our minds that this is not our home. I mean, I am blessed. I am so thankful for our house, my family. I'm thankful for our church building is just amazing. Thankful for all those things. And we want to see those things increase. Like we're stewards of those things, right? We don't want to diminish those things. We want to see our building be used for more, much more than it's being used for, of course. But still, it's in a mindset of, it's not ours. We're here temporarily. We're sowing into something that's going to be reaped when we're dead, when we're gone. Our kids, our grandchildren are going to inherit this stuff. And someday, Jesus is coming back and we're all going to be taken. That day might be sooner than later, right? But this is not our destination. And when we consider it our destination, that's when we become enslaved. We're not enslaved by the government. They don't have the power. We are totally free because of who's in us and where and who we belong to and where we're going. They can never, ever take that away from us, right? This is not our utopia. Some are so disappointed with our country because they've made it their final destination. You understand the frustration coming out against our government is kind of a little bit overboard sometimes. And I'm thinking, why is that, Lord? Well, it's because people think that this is it. America is it. America is not our promised land. Although it's an amazing country. Every time I go to a different country, I come back, I'm so thankful for our country. But it's not my final destination. We can be outraged by the nation oppressing our freedoms, but we have to be careful of becoming enslaved to comfort, convenience, and luxury, right? These are the tactics of the enemy. We don't want to buy into the American dream, right? That screams permanency. Matthew 5:13, Jesus says, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt has become tasteless, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men." They actually, when salt loses its saltiness, they'd actually would just throw it out on the roads and they would trample it. That's where he got that from. But salt does a lot of things. You know, it adds flavor. It preserves. It melts ice. It does a lot of things. And so we want to be salty on the earth. What that means is to be in that place where we know our purpose. We're not distracted by the system of the world, but we're focused on what our purpose is. And our purpose here on earth is to bring the kingdom of God here on earth as it is in heaven. It includes salvations. That is the start of people's experience, right, with God. It includes salvations, but it is discipleship. It is even in the mountains of society. We want to see government change. We want to see the media change. Education, wow, education needs help right now. We want to see the education system changed so that purity is being taught. I mean, it's crazy, but we want to. That's our goal. That's how we're made salty. You know, there's this neat Dr. Seuss movie cartoon. It's called The Lorax. I don't know if you guys ever seen it, but it says, unless someone cares a whole lot, nothing's going to change. You know, and you know, I'm all for, like, let's be activists, Christian activists, where we are speaking up about things, right? Things that matter to God. We want to care. We want to have a voice, right? And so we're going to go through some questions. The power of meeting in groups is that we get to discuss. So I don't want to just monopolize that. I want you to know, just get that message in you, though. Lord, I pray that you just speak with your Holy Spirit to every heart about their situation, how maybe they have, and me included, how we have bought in to this deceptive lie about this being our permanent home. And even if in little ways you want to point that out, Lord, I pray that that message would go deep in us today. But right now, we've got some questions that are going to come on your screen, and we're going to do like maybe 5 minutes, or in between each question, and we'll switch it. But I'm going to read those questions to you before we put them up there, and you guys can discuss it at home, right? Number one, how did the Israelites forget their purpose? Number 2, what's one way you have lost your saltiness? Number 3, what is a promise that God has given you personally? And then in your homes, why don't you get into some prayer? I know we're going to get into some fellowship, and that's awesome. And some of you have already planned to eat together and stuff. But before you do that, after you discuss these questions, I'd like to spend some time in prayer. And we'll put those prayer points up for you, but I'll just point them out. Pray for the saints in America to come back to the vision God has given our country. Pray for the person next to you that they would regain their saltiness. And then prophesy promises over each other. They could be promises from the Word. They could be prophetic words. But prophesy that over each other. We're going to spend some time here just building up this home group, building up the Medinas, and we're going to prophesy over them. So we may not necessarily get to the discussion questions, but we want to make sure that we leave a fire here, that this place is just burning with passion. But remember this, as before I go and we get to the discussion, this is the promised land. That we have promises that should burn in us, that should become our passion. A couple of those promises are, one is Jesus preached, the kingdom is at hand. I mean, it's here, it's within reach. How do we bring that awareness to everywhere, every place we go, right? Another one is, it's found in Colossians, Christ in you. You know that you cannot contain God. He didn't shrink himself. That's the mystery. It's not like he shrunk himself to fit in you. It's like he's in you and that expands everything that you are. It's a crazy concept, but that's a promise that we have. And another promise that I love is John 17:3. Heaven is knowing Jesus. Eternity is knowing Jesus. And these are things that we hang our hat on, we put our anchor down in, not necessarily in this realm, in this land, but in these promises, that's what actually gives us our freedom and our liberty. Promises like that when we're focused on God and His kingdom first, Matthew 6:33, focus first on His kingdom, all those other things will be given to us, but that is not to be our focus. Our focus is to be His kingdom, right?